And this now, but now we get feedback. Here, I have one idea. Oh, now it stopped. Barbara, can you talk?
Well, when I unmute it, you're going to get feedback.
All right, we're going to do one last thing. We're going to, I know what we're going to do. Oh, this is terrible. So it's the first one.
Thank you, StreamYard.
Okay, I think this will do it.
So here's what I'd like to try. Can you hear me now, John?
Okay, how's that now?
Yeah. So I unmuted myself on the computer, but there's no way to get rid of feedback.
Okay, guys, I'm sorry. Let me see if anybody's written a comment.
Yeah.
But I'm not getting any feedback when you talk. I mean, when I'm talking, there's no feedback, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and if I now keep talking, keep talking.
Okay. So here's where the feedback shows up. But I'm going to mute for a second.
All right, mute it.
Okay, so can you hear me
now? Mic
now?
works again.
Can you hear me now?
Your mic doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's something with
Sorry, anybody who's listening. Sorry about this problem, but we just can't get the sound to work. I'm going to turn off the phone. Can you put it to setting, Barbara, that you had it on when we first got online? At least there was some sound.
Yeah,
it's reverb.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Bob, if you can hear me,
Robert, can you hear her? Maybe I can't hear her, and that's the problem. That sometimes happens.
Yeah. Can you hear me? That's the question.
Yeah, there's no, but can you hear Barbara?
Yeah, Bob, if I speak, can you hear me? That's the question.
Oh, okay, you can hear Barbara when you're talking. I just can't hear you.
So, yeah.
So what I'm going to have to do is
maybe take your earphones
I'm going to have to watch your. Oh, this is terrible because I can't hear you. All right,
okay.
I'm going to do a different browser. I'm going to leave and I'm going to come back.
Or you know what? Well, hi everybody. I'm just gonna apologize. We're having some StreamYard issues today, and this is kind of what happens in the world that we live in. Is that we have to just go with the flow a little bit. And I'm glad you're here. For those of you who are tuning in, I'm Barbara Fonte, and I'm waiting for our host, John Firth, who is going to try a workaround procedure because he's having a little bit of technical difficulties with his audio. And let's see. Okay. So, Alan, thank you. All right, great. And we're going to get started soon, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the Achilles heel of the hyperachiever CEO. And whether you're a CEO or you work with a CEO or
there we go. I can hear you now.
Great. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, they had turned off my audio. So I apologize to anybody who was online, but there was a problem with they had turned it off. My audio.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So Barbara, I actually sent you a script. If you can pull that up, I'll start. It's not so much a script as an outline. In any case, sorry, we're starting 6 minutes late. My name is John Firth. I'm here with Barbara Fonte. Unfortunately, she has such a long email address. You didn't see her last name. And actually, she can probably change that to B Fonte. But we've put our email addresses up here because we'd like to make sure that if anybody wants to get in touch with us, They can. This is the first edition of my winter spring series. We usually do 5 or 6 broadcasts and 5 or 6 rebroadcasts. And I'm very happy, as you heard, to have Barbara Fonte here with me. She is a coach like myself, but focuses on sales and mental health, or mental intelligence, positive intelligence. And she's a certified trainer in positive intelligence. And I'm going to let her explain what that is in a second. We are both hyperachievers, according to Positive Intelligence, and it's a program designed by Shirzad Chamine at Stanford School of Business, and you'll hear what that is for a second. In my case, it means not necessarily that I'm wildly successful. In fact, it often doesn't mean that, but it does mean that I have something going on inside of me that actually forces me, makes me want to achieve and to be successful, and that if I'm not, my world starts to collapse. So hyperachiever does not mean that you're wildly successful. In fact, it's a saboteur. It means that you may get in the way of the success that you so desire. And that's why we call it the Achilles heel. Now, there's a specific reason or a specific definition of what that Achilles heel is. We will tell you in a couple of minutes, and maybe you'll figure it out as we're talking. Now, I will turn it over to Barbara so she can quickly introduce herself and tell us a little bit about positive intelligence and what exactly these saboteurs are that I just referred to.
Yeah, thank you, John. And thanks everybody for bearing with us for the first couple minutes of this. You know, this is our new normal world that sometimes we plan everything perfectly and we check things out ahead of time, and we get curveballs thrown at us. And if we've got this hyperachiever inside of us, it can wreck with us and kind of stress us out a little. So we just need to take a deep breath and exhale a little bit.
If things don't go according to plan, or if we're feeling there's a failure, we go nuts.
That's exactly.
And I kept my nuts level, my craziness level down just now, so I'm very happy.
Yeah, it does kind of challenge us. So, yeah. So really, you know, at the heart of it, what is a hyperachiever? What are we talking about here? For those of you who may not have had experience with, as John mentioned, something called positive intelligence. Hyperachiever is basically, it's a way of thinking that drives you to experience success. Not necessarily a successful life, but periods of success. And it really kind of gets you there. It may be the thinking that got you some success in your life, but it can be the very thing that is holding you back from a greater level. And it can be wrecking with your well-being, because that constant drive and need to succeed and achieve can really create a lot of negative energy, like stress and anxiety and worry and so forth. So we call it a saboteur because it can sabotage not only our well-being, but get in the way of us reaching the next level of it. And by the way, what we're talking about today and the framework is really documented. It comes from research of over 500,000 CEOs, world-class athletes, Ivy League grad students, tech teams, sales teams, people like you and me from 50 countries around the world. And researchers took a look at what makes people have a successful life, what makes people reach their potential, who's reaching their potential, and why, and what are the rest of us doing. And at the heart of it, they found in the research that about 20% of people reach their full potential. So the question is, what can we learn from that? What are these folks doing or not doing? And what can we be doing or not doing? And all of this was summarized in the book called Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Chamine. So I just want to, do that shout out. And John, I know you use positive intelligence in your coaching, as I do as well, to help people reach whatever their goals and desires are, but doing so with more positive energy, more ease and flow, right?
Exactly. Now, the reason why positive is so important, and in some level, it's been in our culture for really since, I don't know, at least in the United States since day one, is we recognize the power of positive intelligence, positive thinking, because it's what brings us to the frontal cortex, where our creativity, our logic, advancements in our thinking occur, and it takes us from going back to the amygdala, which is our survival function. Which is really the only two responses. It's fight or flight. So we now have proven through studies and so forth that the brain is wired in such a way that there are pathways that go in either direction. Negative takes you to the fight or flight. Positive takes you to the logic, the reasoning, the ability to make stuff happen that is positive. And that's very important in today's modern world, where so much is about our psychological mental states. In fact, the pharmaceutical industry spends, I believe, 97% of their R&D dollars now on psychopharmaceutical. So it's because we do not have the physical dangers we used to have. It's mental dangers. Now, in terms of the saboteurs, my saboteur is hyperachiever, but I also have two others. So there are 9 saboteurs. My other 2 are controller and hyperrational, which hardwires me basically to be a CEO or a leader. The problem is they're all saboteurs, which means I can get in the way of myself very, very quickly. Remember, this can make me successful, but it can make me not successful. And the examples I'm going to give you now are when something happens, and I will tell you what that is in a second, that causes me to go negative. And it's judging, because we're always judging ourselves and we're always placing judgments of others, as opposed to what we should be doing, which is more, not logical necessarily, but more reality-based discernment. And this is such a huge topic now on the world stage of what is reality. Well, we know that if you go into a state where you're making excuses or you're being negative, the chances are you are not perceiving reality. Reality is a sort of generally agreed to cultural norms, what have you, but you know it when you see it. And when I work with my people and they go off on excuses or stories about why something didn't happen and so forth, they're not dealing with it. They're avoiding it. And that, in fact, is a saboteur. We call that the judge. Everybody has the judge, and that's what turns us negative. And in my case, I have some tendencies that are from the saboteur. One is a fear of failure. Hyperachievers have a terrible fear of failure. So we avoid situations where we think we're going to fail, or if we feel we're starting to fail, we actually fold very quickly because it affects us so emotionally, and we'll run away, fight or flight. Generally, we tend to run away. We just don't do it anymore. And that can have a lot of negative consequences for your career, because if you face a challenge, you put in a role that you find challenging, which was probably done to develop you, for example, you may royally fail because you're not feeling you're being really excellent. So it limits us a lot. It also, as you can imagine, and I went through this, where you get in a situation, say with a board, and you just get the feeling you can't resolve it, and you're going to do something stupid like I did, which was I up and resigned because it was the only way I could resolve it, and that was the flight response. So Barbara, maybe you can tell us how your hyperachiever has exhibited itself.
Yeah. So, and this is, I think is pretty common for people that have this way of thinking, is that you kind of get this sense, or your feeling is that life is all about achievement. And I think as, pretty quickly in our lives, even as children, we kind of get those messages, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it's sort of a lopsided way of looking at the world, that life is really about a whole lot more than that. But if you have this mindset that life is about achievement, then you tend to get your self-esteem from your achievements. Mm-hmm. And while that sounds okay, that's great. The problem is that unless you're constantly achieving, you're kind of reckoning with you. You mentioned the judge, right? We all have that judge. I have that judge too. So it's like, if I'm not constantly achieving, the judge is saying, well, what's up with you? Are you really worth it? So he kind of messes with your self-worth. And so the problem for people that have this pattern of thinking, this hyperachiever saboteur, as you know, is that we don't realize that we're worthy even without our accomplishments. That's the truth, right? We're just as special as everybody else, even if we're not constantly achieving. But in the meantime, that drive to kind of satisfy that maybe sense of worth, it drives us with a lot of stress. And and so one of the things I've discovered in doing the work and kind of quieting that down is that you can get to your goals. You can actually exceed your goals in one of two ways: through that negative energy or through positive energy, right? We call our part of our brain, we call our sage brain. Right. Where we're coming to our ambitions through passion and purpose and so forth. So you can still be ambitious and quiet down that hyperachiever, right? Have you discovered that too, John?
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. In fact, that was the basis of me starting as a coach, was the sense that I was my worst enemy sometimes. But we are so drilled, especially in New York City, where both you and I, we're both from Brooklyn. Barbara's now in Long Island. I'm back in Brooklyn. Is that there's this sort of chicness to being negative, and a belief that an intelligent human being is also critical. Critical is good when it comes from a discernment, a thoughtful place. But when it becomes a judge, it's bad. And we're our worst enemies because we start judging. Other things that I find are that because I'm constantly trying to achieve something, I'm never satisfied. I never can sort of rest. It's hard for me to acknowledge compliments. Most hyperachievers have trouble because it's like underneath it all, it's saying, well, it wasn't really that special. I didn't, even though we work like dogs to achieve it sometimes, it's another aspect of it is we believe if we just work hard enough, we'll get it and we can burn out. But I want to take a break here and just quickly, you have our email addresses. This is the Achilles heel of the hyperachieving CEO. And we're going to talk in a second about how you notice that somebody's a hyperachiever, especially if he or she is your boss or the CEO of a company, big or small. But please feel free to get in touch with Barbara or myself. You have the email addresses here. And we will respond, especially if you want to do the assessment. There's a saboteur assessment. We would walk you through that and help you think about it when you get the results. Now, I promised you I would tell you what the Achilles heel of the hyperachiever is, and we mentioned it, Barbara mentioned at the end. It's at the heart of everything that drives us, and that's a sense of lack of self-worth, that we're just not worth it. And therefore, we have a feeling we don't deserve success. It's not really success because we don't feel it as success. We can't accept success because of our self-worth. And that is the Achilles heel. Now, that said, Barbara, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it's like to work for a hyperachiever and things that people should look for that will tell you that your boss or your CEO is a hyperachiever.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I've been on both ends of that spectrum, right? I've been hijacked by a hyperachiever within my own self, and that's affected myself and those around me. And I also were, and I would say I'm very fortunate. And I hate to even use negative as a word because I just tend to look at the positive things. But I did work for someone that had a very strong hyperachiever saboteur. And he had a lot of accolades. He had achieved a lot within the organization that I worked, and he was thought very highly of by the board. But at the same time, being on his team was awful. When I first got to the team, I didn't recognize it right away. I just noticed that in the meetings we would have with him, that people wouldn't really speak up. They wouldn't challenge things that he would bring to the table. And that seemed a little odd. Something was amiss. And then I noticed occasionally when people would step outside and voice their opinions. And when I did the same, that we learned very quickly not to do that there were repercussions for that, to quiet down. And the reality was, and I didn't realize this back then, was that he didn't want to be challenged. He just wanted to be seen as this brilliant person. And he had success in the past, and that's the way he got that success in the past. He wanted to just take that in the future. And I think that's what you had mentioned, John. There's this fear of trying things differently, doing things differently. What if I fail at something new? So he was very opposed to new ideas. And the truth is that as a team, we were reaching our milestones. We were hitting our KPIs. We were getting there, but there was so much talent on that team. We could have been way up here.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, for myself, after a couple times and realizing there was no way out of this, I was just kind of resigned to, all right, I need an exit strategy here. And I think that's the issue I see also with people that I coach, is that people will either leave, they'll get burned out, or they'll just do what we call now, right, quiet quitting. They'll be there, but they're certainly not working to their full potential.
Exactly. And it's funny because usually when that happens, it's not just an individual, it suddenly spreads itself across an organization and so forth. So the other thing you'll notice, and so that's disempowering. We disempower people if we don't watch out for it. But another thing is it's very hard for us to form emotional attachments. And in fact, we come across as being highly ambitious and not caring about others. That is all about us. And that can be, on some hand, there are some people who have maybe other saboteurs, like the pleaser or something, where they accept it and they say, well, that's just the cost of attaching yourself to a successful CEO or something. But no, that's not. There are CEOs who don't have the saboteur, but second of all, also have it under control, or have learned to have it under control. But it's hard for them to make an emotional bond, especially in a professional setting. Because they're always have this lack of self-worth churning in, and then it really becomes about them. And in my worst moments, I would have people say, it seems to be all about you. And, if you're in sage mode, which we'll talk about in a second, you actually then listen to that and you say, okay, I got to figure out if somebody's saying that, it means something. Obviously, I'm not aware of it. So that's one of the big problems being a leader is when it appears to the team that it's about you. Because then where do they get their motivation from? They feel like I can work hard and hard and hard, and he's going to get all the benefits.
Yeah, true. And you just brought up a really great point also that we see a lot is with regard to forming relationships. So one of the things that we notice, and I don't know if anyone's, watching this in real time or in a replay, if you can identify with this. And John, I'm curious how this resonates with you, is that your persona is really important. What you put out to the world is really important. If you've got a hyperachiever way of thinking, then it's really important to you that people admire you, that they're impressed with you, right? So as a result of that, it's like we kind of hold this sort of like invisible shield. We don't want people to get too close to us because what if they see our flaws? What if they realize we're not maybe as smart as they thought that we were? That's why there's that whole imposter syndrome. Have you experienced that, John, for yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting though, because the imposter syndrome you can actually find with a lot of different saboteurs, the feeling that they're just, somehow this isn't right for them. And then they say, well, this is not who I am. But for me, it was the sense like I'm missing something, that there's something in me that's not working, something I don't understand. And for reasons that I can explain, but I'm not going to right now use the time, is I never got a coach. And a coach would have probably recognized that and gotten it out of me. But there were so many questions that I wasn't getting answered because, you can't go to the board and say, I'm having this problem right now. And your employees, even though they sense it, you're not going to like open the kimono like that. There are very few people you can talk to. And so the issue with needing validation. So when I started out as a young consultant, I was really motivated, ambitious because I was a hyperachiever. And I got lots of accolades. I always got the highest bonus and all this stuff. I was doing really well. Oh my God, I feel great about myself. But what I didn't realize really until recently was the further up I went in the organization, eventually becoming the CEO of first of all, a partner in consulting and then CEO of a trade association, was the higher up you go, the fewer accolades you get. So that when you become the head of an organization reporting to a board, you're under intense scrutiny. And the board will more often than not pull you down or criticize you because they are stewards of an organization. So they're risk managers, they're watching out. And if you're doing something wrong, they're going to tell you that. If you do something good, they just assume that's going to happen and you don't get an accolade. So suddenly your confidence is crumbling because you're getting very few accolades when you're a CEO. So that's another issue, is that the accolades, when they stop, your confidence can go, or your brain goes to negative and you start sabotaging yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't
it? Interesting and painful. So we're going to talk now about the sage powers. In other words, how you stop sabotaging yourself if you're a hyperachiever, or if you have a boss, how you deal with it. And again, I want to remind everybody that this is Firth and Friends, and the Achilles heel of a saboteur, a hyperachiever, a saboteur, is the lack of self-worth. That's the answer if you're wondering what it is. And that comes from early experiences when you're 5 or 6, when the attention and love that you craved as a child, you realize that you were going to get it best by overachieving. But if you don't address the underlying self-worth issues, you carry around you with an Achilles heel. So if you want to get in touch with Barbara or myself, you have our email addresses there. What I would like to now hear from you, Barbara, is how did we find the sage powers? When you somehow acknowledge your saboteurs, they'll never go away, but then you learn how to deal with them and how to find alternative ways of reacting, and you really practice that in the positive intelligence. What happens when what's on the other side of that? It's like the black hole, you've gone through the black hole, and what's on the other side?
Yeah. So it's a really great question. And, in the first part of your question, you mentioned, how do you know this? So the first thing is about self-awareness, because one of the things that can be difficult for people with a hyperachiever way of thinking is really becoming aware of your emotions and your emotional needs. We don't tend to sit in that. We want to move on because we've got things to achieve, right? So being aware of what's driving you, I think, is like the first step. And then we'll talk about like what's on the other side. And so a question I think that can be helpful is, why are you doing the things you're doing? If you're working 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, why is that? Ask yourself that. Take some time to reflect on that. I'm always amazed at, as a society, how little time we take in self-reflection. We're so busy loading up our calendars and our to-dos and catching up on the weekends. But it's a great question to ask yourself on a Sunday morning when you go for a walk or have a cup of coffee, or your house of worship that you go to, or the gym. Why are you spending that time? Are you coming from a place of passion? Are you doing something that you're excited about, that's feeding your ambition to change the world or affect more people, or nurture your team, getting excited about other people reaching their goals? Like, what's really driving you? The ambition, or is it that need to prove something?
Right, that fear.
Or you're running away from fear, right? I mean, fear of failure, which is there is no such thing of failure, but there's that fear, right? So that's the first thing to do, because getting in touch with that is really, really important. And then the second thing to do is, when you're stressed out because you're worried, maybe you're tossing and turning at night, or you've got a big presentation, you've got to do a presentation for your board of directors, or for a potential client or business partner, or customer, whatever. And you're in that stress mode. And this is really hard for hyperachievers, but ask yourself, right at this moment, what is the most compassionate thing that I can say to myself? Ask it and answer it. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a challenge. We're not used to doing that, but it's very, very important, because that's going to quiet that judge that you mentioned, John, right? Which is so strong. So we have to do that, because when we do that, and I know we don't have time to go into the neuroscience of it, but if anybody's interested in what's going on mechanically, please reach out to John or me. The truth is that when you quiet that down, you open up the other parts of your brain that are going to help you show up in the world better. You're going to see that iceberg way ahead. You're going to find solutions that you never knew were there. You're going to come to the world from a place of exploration and curiosity and innovation, which we know is super important for everybody these days. So all of these different powers that we have in our brain, we call it our sage brain, right? They open up. That's where you can tap into your genius. But when you're in that stress mode, you can't get there from here. You think you can, but you cannot. So ask yourself, become self-aware, what's really driving you, and quiet that down a little bit. Challenge it. Challenge the things you're telling yourself. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense in my case. And again, I should see if we have any questions or comments. As a matter of fact, we do. So this came about 3 minutes ago from Michael Perella. And he says, you want to believe that you shouldn't want or need accolades, but that makes you solely responsible for your own coaching. Really tough over an extended period or an extended period. That is exactly it. It becomes exhausting. And again, in my coaching, when I'm dealing with hyperachievers, you have one or two things that I've observed. We all have a self-worth issue, and I get my guys to finally see it. And then what often happens is they get overwhelmed with that, because it sounds like failure. And so you have to address the fact that recognizing that you have a self-worth issue is not a failure. It's a win that you've recognized that. But what happens is either they stop really paying attention to what's going on in their company, so the flight issues, or they become, as you said, so overwhelmed with being part of it. When you're stressed and you work hard, it's like an addiction. In fact, I'm sure there's a dopamine effect. It's like, getting high or getting drunk is you're going to a better place because you're, first of all, ignoring the fact of why you're doing that, which is the self-worth issues. But more importantly, you're sending out adrenaline and so forth to your brain that's saying, okay, you know what? I've got this under control now. And I think I do that a lot because my controller saboteur, which is as bad as the hyperachiever, it like calms me down. I can then go to bed and say, okay, I've nailed every single thing that can go wrong. I've dotted all the things. And that's exhausting over time. Really, that's burnout. So that's what I call empathy. When you can empathize with yourself, but also empathize with the others. That's the beginning of being able also to make the emotional connection. And it's not sympathy. It's knowing what the other person is feeling. It's an incredible power, and it opens the other powers. So why don't you tell us about the other 4 sage powers?
Yeah.
Possible when you can empathize with yourself and understand where people are coming from and feel where they're coming from.
Yeah. So there's a number of different things that we can tap into instead. And you just mentioned the first one, empathy. Sometimes it's hard for hyperachievers to have empathy for others because we set the bar so high for ourselves. We take on a lot of stress. If we see people that, I don't know, we perceive that they're complaining because, they're taking on something that's not like 1/10 of what we're taking on. We sort of like, what's your problem kind of a thing. So empathy
Right.
for
Or you
ourselves and
shouldn't be on my
others.
team. They shouldn't be on my team if you're not willing to.
Right, exactly. I'm so glad you mentioned that, where, we're missing opportunities there. So we can instead, tap into things like curiosity and exploration. Let's find out why this person is thinking the way they're thinking. Let's meet them where they are and help develop them forward. And that goes for the people that are on our team. And it goes for people that we want to work with, potential clients and whoever. Meet them where they are and lean into things like exploration and curiosity. And then you can move into innovation, kind of looking for new solutions without judgment. This is really, really important. And John, I love that you mentioned blameless discernment. That is where instead of judging, we're just noticing. Don't judge yourself. If you've got a hyperachiever saboteur, there's nothing wrong with you. You're a human being. We all have these things. The question is, how strong of a hold it has on us. So we want to tap into things like exploration and curiosity and innovation and, things like navigation, knowing what's really important, what's driving you. Is it, is what you're doing in line with your core values? Developing those kinds of powers, much better for you. It'll help you get through those times where you hit a fork in the road or you hit hit a wall. That will get you through. And of course, that helps you take laser focused, fearless actions on the things that will move you forward and give you that successful life in your career and in your relationships. And by the way, your overall health. So does that make sense?
Totally. And coming to the navigation activation, when you don't have the empathy, first of all, with yourself, if you're being driven by a fear of failure and low self-worth, it colors everything you do. And we talked about the fact that it will alienate a lot of people around you, not only your employees, but possibly your clients and so forth. So when the empathy is not there, you don't really know what to tell your team. You don't know really how to motivate and inspire them. Because your first thought is, oh my God, I'm going to fail. You've got all sorts of other things going through your head instead of what should be going through your head as a leader, which is how do I motivate and inspire? And if you can't do that, then you can't really activate anything. Because again, just like Michael said and we've said, is if it's all about you and you make yourself solely responsible for your success or for the success of the team, you're not activating anybody. If anything, you're activating yourself in the wrong way, but nobody else is getting activated because it's all about you. So that's one. The navigation, each individual is different. And the higher you go up in an organization, the more difficult, I would say, the situations become more complex. You're dealing with greater complexity because you're dealing with more people and what have you, and a board maybe. And if you can't bring the empathy to really understand and understand how people are feeling and thinking, how are you going to navigate? You got a bunch of people that are disconnected that you can't figure out why they're doing what they're doing. The thing I hear the most is, how do I get people accountable? Well, let's talk about you for a second. It's like maybe because you've disempowered them or they don't feel it matters. So the navigation activation for me is, one of the big ones. So there's innovation and that, but there's also just getting people on this field to be doing things.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to what you said before about knowing that people get a sense it's not all about you, right? That it's about connection. And so often what gets people to what appears to be success is a focus on other things, achievements, and not relationships, when in reality, connection is everything. Connection gets people job advancements when they're not the most qualified person for it. Connection gets closing of that sale and gives you an edge in negotiations and so much more. And it gets your team to work hard for you and stay loyal to you when they know that you're in it for them as well. You're serving. You're not just leading yourself.
Exactly. And that again is another, if you're looking for signs, if you think your organization is, especially if you're the owner, but also if you're the CEO, if you're seeing signs that you're frustrated because your organization somehow isn't working out, that's when, if you can say, I'm the cause of the matter, and what is it that I'm doing that's causing that, you'll be much better. But that requires you to have a good, strong sense of worth, because you have to feel like you have the power to be able to make the change. And if your self-worth is struggling, or you're closed in this cage of the persona that you build of successful and confident, a number of times I tell people about the issues that I've had and are having, and it always comes down to this lack of self-worth, and then actually little confidence and so forth. Most people are shocked because I had refined my persona. And that's what makes it hard to work for a boss who looks outwardly confident and so forth. But if you, especially the coach, if you try to criticize a hyperachiever too early in the relationship, they'll blow you apart. They'll take out the because you've just scratched their wonderful persona.
Right. And I think that's it's a good thing to know if you work for or with someone that, this seems to be their pattern of thinking, is that they'll present as someone with a lot of self-confidence and maybe even comes off arrogant, but deep down there could be a lot of self-worth issues. And this is just a way of overcoming that. It's not a great way of overcoming it, because you never get rid of that if you just look for achievement. But knowing that's what's driving that person can help you have a little bit of empathy, and that can sort of take down an irritation level a little bit, which is great.
Yeah, and there are people who work for hyperachievers who, on some level, recognize that they may not use these words, and instead of just sitting there passively and being, not part of it, if they're passionate about the mission of the organization or just the organization for a variety of reasons, you do see occasional more trusted employees or the board pulling the CEO aside. And they know they have the trust of the CEO, and they'll tell them. And I've had to have people, it's then up to us as hyperachievers to listen to them and to take it seriously. And that's, if you could do that and not get defensive and not let your shield that you've built, your persona, have the bullets ricochet off of you by getting defensive, you're going to win a lot. And you're going to hit over, you're going to go over to the right side, which is the sage power side. Yeah. So we're almost finished. Barbara, any passing thoughts?
Well, yeah, there are two thoughts, and I'm thinking one for the hyperachiever, one for those that are around that person, is that one of the things that's hard to do if you are a hyperachiever is to stop and breathe. Mm-hmm. But it's one of the tools that will get you greater results and more happiness. So stopping and breathing, I know, John, you and I have a lot of little things that people can do that take 1 or 2 minutes throughout their day that will really help their overall health and their thinking. But, there are lots of different ways of going about this, but considering stopping and breathing a couple minutes, a couple times a day, and really take stock of what's going on and what you're noticing is a really powerful tool. It can be sort of like a little X factor for you, if you will. That's the first thought. And then the second thought is, we talk a lot, right, about how one person's saboteur can trigger another person's saboteur. If there's somebody who's a real driver, hyperachiever, and maybe is arrogant or whatever, that might get us really annoyed. It's important to know why. What is it within you that is being triggered? So that assessment, John mentioned an assessment. We all have saboteurs. It's not, do I have it? It's what shows up and how loud is it? And so if anybody who's listening to this wants to get more of a sense of their self-awareness and what saboteurs are showing up for them and how they might be triggered by others, please reach out to John or to myself. We can get you access to, it's like a 5-minute little assessment, and it's really eye-opening, isn't it?
Oh, for me, it came after a series of a very dark period, partially caused by COVID. And for many people, with the right mindset, it was a learning experience. But I went really dark about 1.5 years ago, very dark, probably the darkest I'd ever been. And I started looking for help, and I found a coach who got me immediately, but used the wrong methodology. It was to blast apart my persona. And that just made my life even more miserable. So I would listen to him and go, oh my God, you're so right. And then he would drill down and try to blast apart and it stopped working. And that was the low point. That was in about November of 2021. And that's when I discovered positive intelligence. And that pulled me out of it. It plays a huge role in who I am today, which is a much better person than 1.5 years ago. Much more self-aware, much more powerful, happier. So, there are moments in life where you need some help. So if you're feeling that you could do better, or you're working too much, or you've lost your organization or something, reach out, please. This is what we're here for. It costs nothing to talk to us initially, at least, and you might learn something. And if it makes sense, yeah, you might become a client. But I've talked to many people and walk away with the sense I've made an impact, and that's fine. That's very important. And now I'm coming from it from a saved position and not from a self-worth. Is just knowing that you made an impact is awesome, because that's what the world needs. So thank you, Barbara. It's been awesome.
Thank you, John. Thanks for inviting me.
Probably everybody that we had the first 6 or 7 minutes of technical failure. It's not the first time, but it is the first time that I reacted very calmly and didn't let my saboteur go nuts.
Kudos.
I'm technically gifted, and it just happened last month, actually. And I went nuts last month. So now I've determined I'm not going to be. So again, thank you. And I look forward to seeing people in the audience at our next rebroadcast next week, and the week after that, we'll have another live broadcast with my friend Larry Reines. So you'll be getting notifications of that. Have a good day.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Bye, everyone.